Hello, and welcome to Uncle Bruce's Story Time. Did everyone have a good weekend? I hope so. Did you read lots of books? Lots of good stuff out there to read. And this week we have a good one too. It's a classic. We're reading from Disney's classic storybook again today. And today we have Cinderella. It's a good story. I'm sure everyone knows it. Probably seen the movies, right? This story, while short, for most, for a story of this length, it's a good one. It's the classic Cinderella story. I'm sure everybody knows. So let's give it a shot, all right? I'm Uncle Bruce, and it's story time. Walt Disney's Cinderella. Once upon a time, there was a kind gentleman. He lived in a mansion with his lovely daughter. He gave her everything money could buy, but the child didn't have a mother or any friends her own age. So the gentleman married a woman named Lady Tremaine, who had two daughters, Anastasia and Drizella. He hoped this would make his little girl happy. Soon after, the gentleman died, and Lady Tremaine revealed just how jealous she was of his daughter. The cruel woman spent the gentleman's fortune on herself and her two daughters, and forced her stepdaughter to work as a servant. She sent the girl to sleep in the musty attic and called her Cinderella. Cinderella was never sad, though. As she grew up, she made friends with the birds who nested nearby. She got to know the barnyard chickens, ducks, and geese. Her best friends of all were the mice who lived in the mansion. Cinderella made tiny clothes for the mice and birds. She picked out names for each of them, too. The animals thought Cinderella was the sweetest and most beautiful girl in the world. Every morning, the mice and birds woke Cinderella from her dreams so that she could begin her long day of chores. Cinderella started by feeding Lady Tremaine's nasty cat, Lucifer. Then she fed the barnyard animals and the mice when Lucifer wasn't looking. Finally, she got breakfast trays ready for her stepmother and stepsisters. "Pick up the laundry and get on with your duties," Lady Tremaine would often say when Cinderella arrived with breakfast. "Yes, stepmother," Cinderella always answered politely. One day, Lady Tremaine received an announcement from the king. There was to be a ball at the palace that night in honor of the prince. By royal command, all eligible maidens were to attend. Everyone was excited, especially Cinderella. "Why, that means I can go too," she exclaimed. Her stepsisters laughed, and Lady Tremaine looked at her coldly. "Well, I see no reason why you can't go," she said, "if you get all your work done, and if you can find something suitable to wear." Cinderella hoped her wish would come true. She worked hard all day long, but just as she finished her chores, a carriage arrived to take Lady Tremaine and her daughters to the palace. Poor Cinderella returned to her attic. She hadn't had any time to find a ball gown. Just then, the mice and birds surprised Cinderella. They had fixed up a gown for her to wear. She was so happy, she thanked her friends, and then she quickly got ready. Cinderella hurried down the stairs. "Wait, please," she called. Hearing Cinderella's voice, Lady Tremaine, Anastasia, and Drizella turned and stared at her lovely gown. In a rage, her stepsisters pulled and ripped at Cinderella's dress until it was in tatters. At last, Lady Tremaine ordered Anastasia and Drizella to the carriage. She glared at her stepdaughter and followed them out. Cinderella ran to the backyard and cried. "There's nothing left to believe in," Cinderella said, sobbing. "Oh, now, you really don't mean that," a gentle voice said. "If you'd lost all your faith, I couldn't be here, and here I am." Cinderella looked up and saw a woman with a magic wand standing in front of her. It was her fairy godmother. "Bibbidi-bobbidi-boo," the women exclaimed. A garden pumpkin transformed into a coach. 4 of the mice turned into white horses. A horse became a coachman, and a barnyard dog became a footman. Then the fairy godmother noticed Cinderella's ripped clothing. She made her a beautiful gown and tiny glass slippers. She warned Cinderella that the magic would last only until midnight. By the time Cinderella's coach arrived at the palace, the ball had already begun. The prince bowed each time a young lady curtsied before him, but he looked bored. On the balcony above the dance floor, the king stood with the Grand Duke. The king hoped that his son would fall in love with a maiden that night. He wanted the prince to get married. Just then, Cinderella entered the ballroom. No one knew who she was, but the king and the Grand Duke watched as the prince walked over to her. The king beckoned to his musicians to strike up a waltz. The prince and Cinderella whirled across the floor. The ball continued for hours. All evening the prince was at Cinderella's side. They danced and danced. Cinderella had such a wonderful time that she forgot about her fairy godmother's warning. All of a sudden, the clock in the palace tower began to strike midnight. Bong, bong. Oh, Cinderella said goodbye to the prince and ran toward the palace door. One of her glass slippers flew off, but she knew she couldn't stop. She had to get home before everything changed back to the way it had been. Cinderella leapt into the coach, and her friends raced for home. As soon as they rounded the first corner, though, the clock struck 12. The spell was broken, and Cinderella had her friends change back to the way they looked before the ball. "Cinderella, your slipper!" the mice called. She looked down. Sure enough, there was one glass slipper on the pavement. "Thank you so much for everything," Cinderella said in a hushed voice. She knew her fairy godmother could hear her. Back at the palace, the king was upset that the girl had run away. His son had fallen in love with the young woman, but he didn't know her name. All she had left behind was one of her tiny slippers. The prince said he'd marry the girl whose foot fit the slipper, and no one else. So the king instructed the Grand Duke to travel from house to house until he found her. The next morning, when Cinderella heard that the Grand Duke was coming with the slipper, she dropped a breakfast tray in shock. For the first time, she ignored her stepmother's commands and went to her room to change. Lady Tremaine saw the dreamy look in Cinderella's eyes. She suspected that Cinderella was the girl that the prince had fallen in love with, so she quietly crept up to her stepdaughter's attic room. Before Cinderella realized it, her wicked stepmother had locked her inside. By the time the Grand Duke reached Cinderella's home, he had been to many houses. "We must proceed with the fitting," he announced. The Grand Duke's footman held the small slipper up to Anastasia's huge foot. Meanwhile, the mice were determined to free Cinderella. They made a long chain and dangled a cord near the back of Lady Tremaine's chair. The mouse at the end dropped down into her coat pocket and grabbed the key. Then the mice scurried off to the attic and freed Cinderella. When Cinderella finally rushed down the stairs, she saw that the Grand Duke was just leaving. "Your Grace," she called out, "please wait. May I try it on?" The Grand Duke called his footman to bring the shoe over. But then Lady Tremaine tripped him and the slipper fell. Crash! It shattered into 1,000 pieces. The Grand Duke wailed. He didn't know how he would ever explain this to the king. But perhaps if it would help, Cinderella said, "You see, I have the other slipper." Lady Tremaine was horrified, but the Grand Duke was very happy. The footman tried the slipper on Cinderella. It fit perfectly. Soon Cinderella traveled to the palace. The prince was overjoyed to see her again. The king was quite delighted too. In fact, the entire kingdom was thrilled, for Cinderella won the hearts of everyone she met. Once Cinderella and the prince married, she became a princess. The royal couple lived happily ever after. The end. Classic story. Did you like that one? Do you like Cinderella? I like that one. I do not like the wicked stepmother or the sisters. They are not nice at all. But at least she had her little animal friends to help, right? Yeah. And I think it's interesting how, like, the difference between this little story and the movie that most people know. Like in this story, they didn't even name the prince. He's just called the prince, not Prince Charming, not anything like that. He's just the prince. Doesn't really have a name. I think that's funny. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that story. We're going to have another one next week, and it's going to be a very special story next week. It's brand new, brand spanking new. I will read it for you, and I hope you like it. So you know the drill by now, right? This story, this book, there's a link down below in the description if you want a copy for yourself, and links to follow me, of course. And do subscribe if you haven't, so you don't miss a story. And give me the thumbs up if you would. That's very helpful. Okay? Until next week, read more books and be good to each other.